Hey, good morning. My name is Mike Lawrence. I'm lead pastor at Faith Community Church. One church, two campuses. And this morning, I would like to give you an update about families, helping families, Madagascar, because something exciting has happened. Our original goal was to raise $18,000, $6,000 a month, so that we could help 100 families through 10 churches during this incredible crisis that's going on in Madagascar from the COVID-19 virus. And you know what? Your giving was so generous, we're going to be able to go an extra month to help those families, which in Madagascar is tremendous. Because I would like to read to you something that I got from Pastor Dina. He's spoken here. Our contact with Island Mission. Listen to what he says. He says, Pastor Mike, 80% of the families living here are already in poverty. Now people are losing their jobs and with no income can't afford to buy food, medicine, or pay for rent. They've started selling their furniture in order to buy food for their families. Dina told me that one family was down to their last $2, which is 1 day's worth of food. They didn't know what they were going to do for their family. And when the church called them to tell them that they had food available for their family, they broke down in tears. Do you know that our mission statement, right, is loving radically, living generously, and watching Jesus do the extraordinary? And this is it. By living generously, supplying an extra month worth of food, we are watching Jesus do something extraordinary, saving people's lives from starvation. Because when you're a day worker, when you work for the day so that you can buy food for the day and then you can't buy food because you're isolated in your house from a virus, this makes all the difference between life and death. So thank you. Thank you for being an answer to prayer for the families of Madagascar that need your help. We'll keep you abreast on how that's going. So we're in a series called Unmasked. I took a little time off this past week. I took some time off to paint my house. We were transitioning from being a beige house to a gray house. Nothing like painting when it's 96 degrees outside and like 80% humidity. So what are you doing? What's been your COVID-19 project over the last few months? You know that thing that you just did because now you got the time or the ability to do it? Just throw it up in the comment section, whether it's in the church online or it's on our Facebook platform. Just let me see what you've been doing. We look forward to hearing from you. We're in this Unmasked series because I'm asking the question, what does it mean to look good? You know that thing that you like to look good in front of others? Maybe it's your legacy you like to good or look good in front of your family or your kids or just to other people in the world. What are the things in your life that make you look good? We've been watching and studying these 4 great leaders of Israel. As a matter of fact, they're the 4 first kings of the whole nation of Israel. It's remarkable we have their story. It's in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, 2 books by the name of a great leader at that time. I'd encourage you to read it. They're awesome reads. You could pop open and instead of binge watching a show, you could read these stories and you can grow from them. And first week, we looked at Saul. Saul was a guy who looked good but wasn't. And then this week we're going to look at another guy, David, who didn't look good but really was. And then we're going to look next week at a guy who had everything that you think you need in life to look good and feel good but realized it didn't. And then we're going to wind down the whole series by looking at somebody who needed to look good in front of his friends and ended up creating a catastrophe. How's that? So today, we take a look at a guy named David. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to talk about somebody who almost died from an asthma attack. I'm going to talk about why walking through a cave can be an answer to prayer. And then we're going to kind of wind up the whole thing by talking about why it's not really a good idea to take a bath outside. To tie all those things together, I better pray, right? So looking forward to it. And I love talking about David. This is going to be a fun message. God, I just thank you so much for this opportunity to just take your word, unpackage it, and just to show everyone how it applies to life. As you can walk out of the door, if you can walk out of the door, that you can live by what you discover in the Bible. It can change your relationships. It can change the community around you. It can change your workplace. It has just a way of impacting people, even if it's through Zoom meetings, who you are by what you say to us, Father. God, I just love you. I pray that you take this message and use me. Be the words on my lips. Be the power that goes through the internet. touch people's lives. Amen. So we're going to look at one of my favorite characters in the Bible, a guy named David. Last week we talked about Saul, who was the first king. Okay, and what we realized about Saul is he was a guy whose image was greater than his substance, which meant like when he faced a challenge, he tended to walk away from it, afraid to engage it. I mean, this was a guy who was threatened by other people's success. Or this was a person who just capitulated to peer pressure and couldn't stand up to it because he didn't have any substance of the soul, so to speak. Let me tell you what I mean, because David in many ways is the counterpoint to Saul. So there became a point in Saul's leadership where God kind of had enough. And he decided he was going to change leaders. He's going to start a slow process of that. He was going to find another king who would take Saul's place when the time was right. He got a hold of Samuel. We talked about Samuel last week. He was a great leader at the time that God used to sort of like spread important news and to make important decisions for the nation. And he said to Saul, I want you to go to this household. His name is Jesse, and I'm going to pick one of his sons to be Saul's successor. So Samuel showed up and he began to meet the sons that Jesse had. And the first son he met was a guy named Eliab. Now listen to what happens. When they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, surely this is the Lord's anointed. But the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or height, for I've rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. This is critical to the message today. You see, Saul was a guy that everybody looked at and thought he had all the trappings of being a king because of his image, but they weren't looking to the substance. But God looks to the substance and he finds it in our heart. You see, the heart is the place where the mind and heart intersect together with your thoughts and with your emotions. It's the secret place of who you are that no one else knows but God. It's the part of you that your family might see, or it's the part of you in your memories, or it's the part of you where your ambition and your desire and your drive all intersect. It's the character of who you are. And what God is saying is it's the character that gives you substance. And we're going to see that play out in David's life because David was a guy whose substance exceeded his image. Show you what I mean. You see, when your substance is greater than your image, then you face adversity because you understand that it makes you stronger, not weaker. Something that Saul didn't understand. So David, at one point in the story, goes off to visit his brothers who are at war with a nation called the Philistines. And in that war battle, there was a moment that there was this huge warrior who takes center stage. He would come out in the morning and he would challenge Israel. It would be a battle of the champions. Sometimes what they would do to preserve people and resources, one side would throw out their greatest champion and they would challenge the other side to throw out their great champion. And whoever won the fight won the battle. That's what was playing out. Every morning, this giant of a man, Goliath, would go out and throw out a challenge. And last week, we talked about that challenge. Saul would be terrified and would be hiding out, afraid to take on the challenge. Well, now, David was a very young man when Samuel met him, and God pegged him to be the next leader. David was probably in his later teenage years. And he heard Goliath's challenge. And he was affronted by it because Goliath was defaming God. He was defaming Israel, right? And then Goliath was just like making a mockery of the whole situation. And David could understand why no one would stand up to this person. So finally, he seeks out Saul. He finds out there's even a huge reward attached to the whole thing. So he finds Saul and he offers to go into battle. And here's how he explains his qualifications. David persisted. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats. You see, David was a shepherd. And he said, when a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and I rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. And finally, Samuel consented and said, all right, go ahead. And may the Lord be with you. What an incredible statement, right? So here's David willing to rise up to the challenge to defend God and to take on this giant of a man. And here's Saul in the background saying, I'm behind you, kid, way behind you. Like up in my tent, rooting for you from a distance. Because Saul's image was greater than his substance, he would back away from adversity and trial. But David, whose substance was greater than his image, was willing to embrace adversity. He loved God, so he sought to honor God. He wasn't going to allow somebody to defame God in front of him. He was going to rise up to the challenge and take on this person. He just trusted God in his faithfulness. David had learned from experience that God was going to be there during trial and suffering and struggle and adversity. The God who would do this in my past was going to do this in my present and even into my future. It just gets so great as you read this story. Listen to what he says to Goliath. David replied to the Philistine, you come to me with sword, spear, and javelin? I'm going to come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today, the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give it to us. Do you hear what he's saying? I trust God, so I will face adversity. I will trust in God's faithfulness, who is there in my past, to be present in my future. You see, David had served as a shepherd. As a kid, his father had sent him out to watch the sheep out into the dangerous areas of the wilderness. He had faced off against a lion. He had faced off against a bear. If he could take on a bear, he could take on this giant of Goliath. He had learned through adversity that God would protect him and empower him, that God was there in the difficulties of life. That's what we learn. People of substance have learned that we lean into adversity, that we move forward and we face it. We go through it, trusting that God will be there with us in those moments. One of my favorite presidents is a guy named Teddy Roosevelt. As a kid, Teddy was sickly. He had asthma at a day and an age where they didn't have the medicine or the medical means they have now to treat a child. There were times that Teddy almost died from asthma attacks. And so you know what his father did? Built a gym for him. His father hired a trainer to come in to make Teddy stronger, to build up his system. He even decided at one point that Teddy needed to learn to box, and so he hired a boxer to come in and to teach his son the sport of boxing. And you know what happened? As Teddy grew older, he took every adversity the same way he took on the adversity of asthma as a kid. He learned to fight. He learned to face it. He learned to push through it because he understood that if he faced adversity and went through it, he could become a stronger man, not a weaker one. Just like David. David learned to trust God in the midst of adversity, and by facing it and pushing through it, came out stronger, trusting God to be in it. And look at us. We're in such a time of adversity right now, whether it's the global pandemic, or maybe you've been sick, or you've lost your job, or we're in an economic upheaval right now in our nation. There's racial tension that we're struggling through. Think of all these battles of adversity. And sure, it is scary at times and overwhelming. Sometimes so overwhelming you just want to hide under the sheets. You're going to get angry at God for going through this difficulty that you're facing. And yet, what do we learn? We gain substance by facing adversity and going through it with God. This is the means by which we become the people that God has called us to be. This is actually, 2020 is a great year for building substance into your soul and becoming stronger. Don't avoid God. Sometimes people, when they hit these moments of adversity like this, they want to run from God, angry at God, confused by God, upset at God. Instead, what we learn from a guy like David is that you trust God, you go to God. You know, every single person I admire in the Bible, every person that I've read about in history who has followed God and loved Christ that I admire, every living person that I know through all my years of ministry that really trusts God, every single one of them learned the value of adversity, of following and staying close to God. Though they walked through a valley of the shadow of death, they knew that God would protect them and keep them safe and bring them out to the other side. Trusting God through adversity, we find substance to our soul. I mean, do you agree? Have you ever been in that position? Have you discovered that God will actually build your soul up by helping you face adversity? And throw up some hearts. Give me some likes. Come on, make me feel good. No, help me see that I'm not the only one who believes this. Show me that God has given you strength and substance by facing adversity with him. And I get it. Next, if you're going to do this, then that means you take action. It means you get up out of bed. It means you put your feet on the ground and you work your resume. You just do that. You've lost your job, but you know that God will lead you to helping and find another job. If you face discrimination, then don't back away from the challenge. Engage it with bravery. Engage it with compassion and courage, like we heard the Burtons talk about just a few weeks ago. These are challenges that we're facing into these times, but they're challenges that can help make you stronger. You know what to do? Take the time to reflect on your life. Look back at a time when you faced adversity, when life was really hard. And here's the true value of hindsight. Hindsight's value is being able to look back at life to find the footprints of God through life's most difficult moments. I can remember doing that. At different times in my life, I will pull back and I will look. There was a point where I had this tremendous malady. Actually, I had a lung collapse. It happened a few times and it wasn't getting better. And they were going to do surgery. Well, they forgot to tell me they were going to do surgery. So they just showed up one morning when I was in the hospital, my lung deflated, been there for 5 days. And they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to open up your chest and we're going to operate on your lung today. Talk about adversity and stress. And then I had these two men show up. They had been having breakfast that morning. They knew I were in the hospital. They just felt led by God to show up and to pray for me that day at that moment as I was heading into surgery. God was with me in a terrifying moment. He was present by sending people to be with me. I could have been angry. I could have been upset. I could have looked and said, God, where are you in the midst of this chaos? And not even notice that he had sent people by my side. But by reflecting back on life for those moments and seeing God and how he was present, that'll make you stronger to face adversity into the future. That's where you get substance from, like what David did. See, but the other thing is people of substance, they refuse to compromise their convictions. One of the things we've learned about Saul is that Saul got really threatened by David's success. So threatened that he decided he wanted to kill David and just eliminate the threat. David went on the run. He kind of collected a group of brigands, lived in the wilderness among the mountains and in the caves, a whole network of caves. So he was hiding from one cave to the next, and he was trying to build a following and do good out in the wilderness, kind of like a Robin Hood of his day. Well, Saul was angry and sought to chase him because he just wanted to kill David, wipe out the opposition, and he thought maybe that might secure his throne and his leadership. It was really sad because when you read the story, David was actually a friend to Saul. David married Saul's daughter. He was a close buddy to Saul's son. And there's no indication at this time that he would have tried to take David's throne by force. He was a friend and a companion, but that's what insecurity does, right? Fear turns friends into enemies. And so there was this one moment when Saul was chasing after David, and he had the army with him, and they stopped, and he wanted to give the army a time to refresh themselves. Saul decided to go to the bathroom in a cave. And this is an incredible moment of irony. Out of all the mountains and with all the caves and all the mountains, Saul picks a cave where David is actually hiding, doesn't know this, and takes the moment to go to the bathroom. Well, David slips up, quietly cuts off a piece of his robe because his friends are encouraging him, you should kill Saul. This is your opportunity. You said that God has picked you to be the next king. And out of all the caves, in all the mountains, in all of Israel, Saul's in this cave where you're hiding, and you think you shouldn't take advantage of the moment and seize it by violence and kill Saul, and we can stop running in the wilderness? But here's what happens. Out of conviction, David decides to not kill Saul. Saul leaves the cave, goes down into the valley, and Saul emerges from the cave and calls out Saul's name, and this is what he says. The Lord placed you at my mercy back there in the cave. Some of my men told me to kill you, but I spared you. For I said, I will never harm the king. He's the Lord's anointed one. Look, my father, at what I have in my hand. It's a piece of the hem of your robe. I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. This proves that I am not trying to harm you and that I have not sinned against you, even though you've been hunting for me to kill me. May God judge between us. Perhaps the Lord will punish you for what you're trying to do for me, but I will never harm you. As that old proverb says, from evil people come evil deeds, so you can be sure that I'll never harm you. And that's it. Core conviction. From evil people come evil deeds. And David was not going to take the throne by violence. He was not going to kill someone. He was going to leave it up to God to resolve the situation, even if it meant he had to suffer to do so. Because David was living by that core conviction. Evil people do evil deeds. And it would have been evil to murder Saul in that cave. Right? And I get it. Life is hard. And sometimes it's hard because we're being treated unfairly by people who are undermining us. And we can be tempted to just kind of take matters into our own hands. You know the scenes, right? Someone has a terrible relationship with their spouse. Maybe they're abusive, or they're just a horrible person to live with. And they're off traveling on a business trip. And suddenly the opportunity comes to have an affair. And what do your friends say? You deserve it. You don't deserve to be treated like that by that person, by your spouse. You deserve to be happy. If I were in your shoes, I'd have the affair. Or maybe it's the boss. The abusive boss who degrades you and humiliates you and takes credit for your projects, and then you realize that the report that he's about to use for his presentation has the wrong numbers. And you know what your friends say? Let it go. Let him make a fool of himself. Why should you try to fix his mistakes? Or maybe you're the kid in school who's been humiliated by that girl, and they're tearing you down in class and they're bullying you, and you don't know how this happened, but somehow you got involved in the texting group, or her boyfriend sends out a picture of her naked, and now you've got a naked picture of her that you could blast out and use in ways that would just humiliate her and tear her down. And you've been treated unfairly by somebody, and the situation presents itself where you can retaliate and get revenge. What are you going to do? David lived by a principle. Evil people do evil deeds. But David reminds us that you can't do the right thing the wrong way. That doing that opens a door to corrupt our character and to corrupt the situation. And David teaches us that sometimes we just have to suffer to do the right thing God's way, trusting that God can bring about a resolve to the situation. Doesn't mean you don't confront the person. David did. Doesn't mean you don't challenge the individual to do the right thing. That's what David did. Doesn't mean you have to live in the relationship with this person who's treating you this way. David didn't. But David also didn't compromise his core character. David teaches us, stay strong, stay true. Sometimes we need little maxims like that we just repeat to ourselves. Stay strong, stay true. We keep it in our mind when we're in those challenging situations. Stay strong, stay true. When we're being treated unfairly and we don't know what to do, we just need to remind ourselves, stay strong, stay true. You know, do that with me in your house right now. And I know this seems weird, right? And I don't know what you're doing. Maybe you're cooking supper and you've propped this up to listen to me. If it's good, let me know. I'll come by. Just put down the knives for a minute, or stop the cooking. Just say, stay strong, stay true. Maybe you're watching this as a family. Say it together as a family. Stay strong, stay true. Maybe you're driving and you're just listening to it. Say it out loud in your car. You'll sing in your car, so why not say this out loud in your car? Stay strong, stay true. because people with substance won't compromise their convictions. But when they do, people with substance, great substance greater than their image, they own it when they blow it. So let's go a little bit further into David's life, because there's a place in David's life where David has finally secured the throne. He didn't kill Saul. Saul dies in battle. The people rally around David, and eventually he's able to unite the whole nation. The nation begins to prosper. It becomes a much stronger nation. It gains a great reputation. They're still doing battles, expanding their frontiers. And David at this point is now riding on the coattails of success. So here's what happens. David actually kind of slips into cruise control. Instead of going off into battle anymore, David decides to hang out back at the palace and let other people fight the battles. And this is one of the mistakes that he makes, because strong leaders should never slip into cruise control. When you stop facing the challenges, you let other people fight those battles, and you're just going to sit back and you're just going to rest on it, that's a place you begin out of boredom to open yourself up to trouble. That's what happened to David. David goes on a walk on the roof of the palace in the Middle East during the heat of the day, right? When everything is hot, the night begins to cool, and they'll get outside and they'll get a fresh breeze, and they'll go on top of a building where the breeze will blow, and it's just kind of a sweet moment as the night begins to take over, and he's walking around. Maybe it's around dusk, maybe it's the end of the day, heading into the evening, and he notices a young woman who's taking a bath on top of her building. Not completely uncommon. People might do something like that. A little weird to do that at that moment. I'm telling you, it's not a good idea to take a bath outside. You just don't know what's going to happen. And David walks by and he sees her. And this is the second thing David does that's wrong. He looks, he lingers, he takes action. That's how we get ourselves in trouble. That's the way temptation builds off into actions that we regret. We stop and we look. We linger and we let the desires start to grow. And then we start to take steps of action. And so he invites her into his palace. He seduces her at night. And wouldn't you know it, one action has a horrific consequence. Matter of fact, there's a whole trail of brokenness that's about to erupt. And it begins because she gets pregnant. David tries to get her husband into the palace, try to convince him to go sleep with his wife, this woman named Bathsheba. And then they can say, well, the child is really his. But this guy has more integrity than David does at this point in David's life. And he won't sleep with his wife because his men in battle can't sleep with their wives. Great, a guy with integrity is only making it worse. And so he creates a scheme. And he creates this moment through military communique where Bathsheba's husband, this guy Uriah, gets thrust into the forefront of a battle that was hopeless, and Uriah dies a hero. And poor Bathsheba is the grieving widow. So David takes her into the palace and marries her, and then makes the child legitimate. But you can't keep secrets in a palace. You can't keep secrets in an army. And slowly David's secret with Bathsheba kind of leaks out. And David has a moment where he gets confronted by somebody, a man named Nathan, a prophet who comes and confronts David about the sin that he has committed with Bathsheba. And this is kind of a scary moment for Nathan, because David could deny it. He could remove Nathan like he did Uriah. But here's what happens when Nathan confronts him. It's a short and poignant passage in the Bible. David confessed to Nathan, "I've sinned against the Lord." And Nathan replied, "Yes, but the Lord has forgiven you, and you won't die for your sins." So here we are. David's forgotten his core convictions. Evil people create evil deeds, do evil deeds. Isn't that what happens sometimes in life? We wander away from the convictions that once gave us strength. We can become successful and we forgot how we got started. We kind of blow the relationships of our past. We don't appreciate how people helped us get there. We begin to compromise the morality that gave us strength in those early days, and we do something we deeply regret, and now we're caught with what we're going to do. And David becomes an example that people with substance own their failures. I've been in ministry for a long time, And I've seen it happen when people get confronted with these type of moral failures. I've seen them take typically go in one of three directions. I see them deny it. This is the I didn't do that. The person who tries to cover it up, who denies it publicly, left and right, and tries to blame other people for these mistakes and say that there's a great conspiracy behind it. The evidence may be overwhelming, but they just choose to refute it. We've seen this in the Me Too movement. Celebrities that we used to respect, politicians that lead our country, business people who have power and influence over the workplace. And they get accused of this sexual misconduct. And then there's a list of people who can give testimony to similar patterns of behavior and abuse that have happened and how it's just kind of extended through a legacy of people, and then they deny it. Right? The person who gets confronted, they pull back. It's all a conspiracy against me, or it was all sexual consent, and now they're changing their tune. And no matter what people say, or the evidence that comes out, or the convictions that start to rise up in those who say, man, you shouldn't have done that, they just continue to deny, and it's sad. They look like the emperor who's lost his clothes, and everyone can see how naked they are except them, and they're draining away their substance till they have nothing but an image, and it's a sad image now that's been corrupted. Sometimes people deny it. Sometimes people excuse it. It's the yes, but. Well, you don't know how hard it is for me. You don't know what it's like being me. You didn't grow up the way I didn't grow up. You didn't face the circumstances. You know how rough the relationships were. I see this happen a lot of times with people who have addictions. Oh, the urges are so powerful, and you don't have to face that. You don't drink, you don't use, you don't know what it's like to be me. You know how tough my life has been, how hard my relationships are, all the pressure and stress I'm under. This is the only way that I can manage. And yeah, I'm sorry, but it wasn't that bad. It's sad. Every excuse is just a form of denial. It's not my fault that I'm this way. And so they seek to excuse their failures. And it's sad because they're losing substance, or they've lost it and they don't realize it. But David teaches us that a person whose substance is greater than an image just owns it. It's an honest response to a difficult confrontation. No excuses. I did it and it was wrong. Having substance means that you don't compromise your convictions. But having substance also means that when you do compromise, you own it. No arguing, no excuses, no denial, a simple, yes, I did it, and it was wrong. We're not perfect. And we make mistakes. And sometimes as parents, one of the greatest lessons we teach our children is 3 simple words. I was wrong. Not excusing it, not trying to justify it to our children and giving a long litany of reasons why we did what we did. It's just saying, no, what I did was wrong. And I'm sorry. Because David becomes an example for us that in those moments, we can just accept responsibility for our actions. David's heart that God admired when he was a child is still present in his soul in this honest, humble acceptance of responsibility for wrongdoing. And what's remarkable is the way that God responds. The way that God responds with forgiveness. David committed adultery, and it was wrong. And that adultery led to the death of a person and destroyed a reputation at that point for David. But God's forgiveness at work through David's humble acceptance of his responsibility, that humble acceptance gave birth to a legacy of what we call Psalms, spiritual record of David wrestling with God when he committed wrong. He knew he was wrong. He was ashamed for what he had did and just went to God to simply confess it. In these Psalms of, we call them penitence and contrition, where David just owns and works out with God the path that had led him into that moral failure, And then the only thing you could do at the end of that journey to just pour it out to God and ask for forgiveness and receiving forgiveness and finding new joy and direction in life. His spiritual records of these journeys have been preserved for us in the Bible. It's a gift that's given to us that God in his forgiveness empowered David to write these powerful records that we can use today in our own journey of finding our way out of our own failures. That act of forgiveness in God helped David through life. We see it. David's family became a wreckage after that. You know that his family legacy includes murder, rape, and insurrection. But God in his forgiveness did something remarkable. When it came time for David to die and a successor to take the throne, you know who God chose to be David's successor? The second son out of that marriage with Bathsheba. It was God's way of saying that David had been forgiven and that we don't have to bear the failures and faults of our parents moving forward into life, that we can be redeemed and called out by God when we seek him through forgiveness and we own it in our own confession, that God can redeem that and give us a better future. It's powerful what happens when we seek forgiveness to God. David had fractured his relationship with God, but through humble contrition and humility, owning it, it sought out to repair it. I have sinned against the Lord. And David heard that. God heard that. And you know what God did? This is amazing. When you study the genealogy of Jesus, you know who Jesus' forefather was? David. It's in his lineage. God brought Jesus, the Messiah, through David. A sign and a symbol and how God can take us out of our worst moral failures when we truly own it and we seek to rebuild our life through God's forgiveness. That God can build a great lineage through us and do remarkable, tremendous things through our lives when we own it as people of substance. I have seen wonderfully courageous people in our church do this. I have had the privilege of becoming friends with people who have recovered from their destructive choices because they've owned it. They've turned to God in humility, asked for forgiveness, and took responsibility for their actions. People who have prison sentences, people who had to find recovery through going to a center and having to dedicate and devote themselves to finding a way through their addictions out the other side. People whose choices dissolved their families, but through devotion and love and dedication sought to rebuild those relationships. I have seen God work through the wreckage of their choices to rebuild their lives and to give them new purpose and new meaning, to rejuvenate them, to reinvigorate them, to give them a new, powerful relationship with God. To see them in ministry leadership in our church, influencing the lives of others, coming out of that dark period of their life because they owned it and they sought to rebuild it with God's help. David's such an amazing person. What does it mean to look good? It means that your substance is greater than your image. It means you face your adversity, understanding that it doesn't make you weak, but it can make you stronger. It means you hold fast to your convictions. And it means that when you do compromise your convictions, you own it without excuse and you face it with God's help. There's an opportunity. Look, we're going to go from the message into music. Don't bounce off. Stay with me for a minute. Keep it playing. Whatever it is that you're doing, would you just stop and would you just focus on this moment? I'm going to pray for you. And as the worship team goes into the song, this is an opportunity that in the midst of this COVID isolation in your home or in your kitchen or whatever it is that you're doing, just stop for a moment. What is God pressing in on you? Is this a moment for you to come to grips with the failure of your past? To stop running from it and to hold firm to it? Are you in the midst of an adversity and this is a moment for you to stop and to trust God and to lean into it? Whatever you're doing, would you please hang in with us for the next few minutes and spend this time with God? Let me pray. God, would you be with us? Would you help us? Would you touch those who are struggling with adversity, suffering, and trial? Give them the strength and find you in the midst of it that they could move through it and become stronger people of substance. But God, would you help those who are struggling in their failures to find hope just through ownership, to turn to you and to seek to rebuild their lives through your help. Meet us, God, at this moment, I pray, even through the distance of this remote service. Would you be in their hearts and in their homes? Amen.